Hello and welcome to Crime Bytes, the show where we talk about some truly bizarre and disturbing crime cases. My name is Liz and today is True Crime Tuesday. I hope you all are having a great end to your winter and are as happy as I am that spring is just around the corner. I live in New England and every year I can just feel it right before we hit March. Anyhow, where we're going today, it's about to become fall. We are going to do a little seasonal flip-flop here and travel back over to Australia for today's episode. There are so many fascinating things about Australia, too many to list, but a recurring joke about the country is how rugged its animal population is. I would love to go one day, but I won't pretend for 1 second that I'm not going to be looking over my shoulder for those funnel web spiders and taipans or the crocs and whites in the water. Whew, crikey. There's really no safe space from these critters, it seems like. And yet so many people live there, so it must be okay. Till it isn't, I guess, anyway. Anyways, today we are going to be looking at two very unlikely accidents that occurred in the land down under, with one eerie underlying similarity. Let's start by meeting Dr. Martin Pearson, a local university professor and veterinarian. Dr. Pearson loved animals so much, and he was always adopting the ones that needed homes with his wife, Sandy. They would adopt everything from greyhounds to lab rats if they needed a family. On top of his love for animals, Dr. Pearson was also an avid cycler. He loved the feel of the open road on his bike, and although he was a little bit afraid of the obvious dangers that cyclists face on the road, he did everything that he could to mitigate those dangers, from wearing a ton of reflective gear to choosing roads that typically had less traffic on them. It's April 25th, 2014, and Dr. Pearson is on one of the last days of a 9-day-long endurance cycling event. He has just stopped for lunch in the park with Sandy, who made him some high-energy pasta, a salad, and white bread to help carry him through the rest of his day. He sets off on his bike to finish the day's route, and she sets off in her car to meet him later in Daly, that night's checkpoint. As she is driving, she receives a call from one of the cyclists who was ahead of her husband, and he says that there was a pretty bad accident and that they were closing off the roads. It would turn out that despite his every effort, from custom building bikes with more reflective lights and whistles on them, to even picking out times of the day to ride when the sun's glare wouldn't be too high in oncoming drivers' eyes, Dr. Pearson would become the victim of a hit-and-run accident. Apparently, whoever hit poor Dr. Pearson just kept on going, and he was found laying on the ground just before his bike, which was all smashed up and tangled in a fence. There was only one item amidst the wreckage that didn't belong to Dr. Pearson, and that was a 50-watt light for spotlight, which was believed to be ripped from whatever large truck hit him. Initially, that spotlight, combined with public appeals for anyone who was involved or who may have seen something that could help to come forward, were all that the police had to go on. And because no one ended up coming forward, police ended up having to use a traffic counter to determine the speed of the vehicle traveling along the road at the same time as Dr. Pearson would have been, along with how many axles it would have had. From there, they were able to go back and review the CCTV traffic tapes and find the truck itself. And when they were finally able to track down the driver, he claimed to have no idea that he had even hit Dr. Pearson. Now, the second story we're going to look at today deals with a family tragedy. Our family in question is the Slebas, Geoff and Leanne, and their 4 children. The couple married when Leanne was 20 and Geoff was 27, and she started having her children shortly thereafter. Geoff came from Lebanese immigrants who established themselves in Queensland and did very well with farming and building related businesses. Leanne was described as a small town girl, and after marrying Geoff and becoming a mother, she was able to just pour herself into motherhood, and she really seemed to love it. She stayed home with her children, but also volunteered at the schools where they attended and at her local Lions Club. To most people looking at the family from the outside, they seemed like the perfect family. One chilly night in April would change everything, though, and leave the world with so many unanswered questions. On the night of April 24th, 2008, Geoff would arrive home from work just before 9 when he was pulling into his garage. He saw something slither on in ahead of his car. A freaking snake, and from the looks of it, not just any snake. The snake that Geoff thought he saw slither into his garage was an eastern brown, which is Australia's second most toxic snake. Leanne apparently wasn't having it and told him that she hated snakes around the house with their kids and encouraged him to take care of it. She would even go with him. He had shot snakes on his property before, so grabbing a gun to take care of the snake wasn't an abnormal event at their house. Tonight he grabbed a 12-gauge shotgun and the pair went into the garage to look for the snake. While they were moving boxes around and looking for the snake, Geoff had the gun cocked and ready to go with his finger on the trigger. Then Leanne would back her car in and out of the garage to try and see if the snake had hid under it in it or they could just disturb it from its hiding spot. That didn't do anything, so she backed in and the pair continued to look for the snake. At this point, Geoff said that out of nowhere, the snake had crawled over his boot and startled, he jumped and the gun went off right into Leanne's back, killing her. In his words, I've just sort of, jumped and kicked back and the gun's gone off. He said he didn't know where the snake had come from, but that it was heading that way. When the authorities came, Geoff was laying on top of his wife crying. Now, of course, this incident would be investigated, and within 2 days, the police would determine that Leanne's death was a tragic accident. Now, what ties our 2 tragic accidents together is that Geoff Sleba was the man driving the truck that killed Dr. Martin Pearson only 6 years and 1 day after he shot his wife in the back in his garage. Gun experts say that the 12 gauge would need to be loaded, cocked, and then the trigger would have to be pulled for it to go off. So this would line up with what Geoff stated about walking around with his gun cocked and his finger on the trigger. As a reaction to shock, a finger pulling the trigger would probably be automatic. So unless he was pointing the gun at her back while looking around for the snake, he would have more than likely shot by his own feet instead of straight ahead of him and into her back. Geoff was also inconsistent in describing how far away Leanne was from him when he shot her. He accounts her being next to him, right in front of him, and then 4 to 5 meters away from him in various accounts. Leanne was killed from one clean shot to her back. Ballistics experts determined that he would have been very close to her when he was shot. They ran tests to determine that her injuries were more consistent with a 250 to 500 millimeter range instead of a 4 to 5 meter range. So she was shot at a point blank range in the back. Basically, he was one step away from her. He also stated that although he had no firearms training and an expired license, that he would use his shotgun up to 20 times a year on snakes or other pests on his property. So I'm sorry, but at the very best, we have a gun-toting, negligent cowboy who jumps when his finger is on the trigger and accidentally shoots his wife square in the back, or we have something much more cold and sinister here. Now, most people would describe Geoff and Leanne as the perfect couple, so to speak, but really there is no such thing. And the problems that were rumored to be under the surface in this relationship may have been more than just small ones. The year prior to her death, Leanne took their kids and moved in with her mom after seeing texts on her husband's phone and wondering if he was cheating. That's huge. That's not just talk, that's letting him know that she wouldn't put up with certain things. So, along with accusing him of having affairs, she was also described as wanting greater independence, financially and otherwise, from her role as Miss Sleba. She also put around $20,000 or so in a private bank account, and it was unclear if Geoff was aware of this or not. Another key piece of evidence, if you will, was the temperature on the night in question. Now, on this April night, it was cold, 12 degrees Celsius to be exact, which is around 53 degrees Fahrenheit, so snakes wouldn't be moving around so much. When the event was literally recreated with an eastern brown snake, the snake was not moving at all. Snakes become extremely sluggish and focus on conserving their energy when it's cold. So, given the temperature on the night in question, the way that Geoff describes the snake's behavior seems very unlikely. The opposing argument was that the snake could have found a heat source, which would have potentially given it the energy to slide across Geoff's foot quickly, but overall, the way that he described things is, again, pretty unlikely. It gets even more wild, though. Sleba didn't even have to testify in court, as a psychiatrist determined that it would be too much mental stress for him. He was diagnosed with an acute psychotic disorder and was hospitalized for it. His psychiatrist stated that he was unlikely to withstand the stress of attending court, recall the events of his wife's death, think and act rationally, or give coherent testimony. Because of this, he was excused from testifying. Sleba had either gotten away with cold-blooded murder or severe criminal negligence. Let's circle back now to when Sleba killed Dr. Pearson. Despite a very vocal public appeal for anyone traveling that road that day to come forward, he did not. On top of this, Sleba literally removed the second headlight that matched the one that was ripped off of his truck by Dr. Pearson when he struck him. So he had to know that something was up. During his trial, he was deemed competent to stand and argued that he had undiagnosed sleep apnea, which could have caused him to momentarily be sleeping at the wheel and not remember hitting Dr. Pearson. I'm sorry, what? I don't know a whole lot about sleep apnea. I thought narcolepsy was the one that made you do that. So I went and Googled it. And the best that I could find is that it looks like it can cause you to be really fatigued. So, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but if he did have a disorder that caused him to fall asleep here and there, potentially when he was driving, should he even be driving? I mean, it was undiagnosed, but that's your argument? Sleba was found not guilty of dangerous driving causing death with callous disregard, as the jury was not convinced beyond reasonable doubt that he knew that he hit Dr. Pearson. He was, however, found guilty of dangerous driving causing death. He received a 3-year sentence that would be suspended after 13 months. No apologies were made to the family. Queensland coroner John Hutton stated, had he been prosecuted for the first matter, the killing of his wife, and had he been convicted, then he very well may not have been on the road at the time Dr. Pearson was killed. That is the bitter irony. This coroner was not involved in the original investigation or prosecution of Sleba. However, he did petition to have the case involving Leanne's death reopened, but the presiding magistrate refused his request, stating that they are not satisfied that there is any new evidence which casts doubt on the original findings, or that the findings were not correctly recorded. Which may be true, but it just seems like justice not only wasn't carried out for Leanne, but this injustice got to compound itself with what ended up happening to Dr. Pearson. And that's just tragic. And that's going to do it for today's stories, but as always, let's try to end today on a positive note. Now, I know you've probably heard of the cocaine bear, but what about meth snake? So I came across an article with the title, Drug Addicted Python Rehabilitated by Australian Prisoners, which is so freaking fantastic on so many levels. But apparently, during a drug bust, there was a 6-foot-long jungle python that was addicted to meth from absorbing all the fumes through its skin. That's sad. But 7 months later, under the care of 14 inmates, the python went from extremely aggressive to what would be described as more normal python behavior. These inmates also help care for animals such as kangaroos, wallabies, and birds as a part of a rehabilitation program. And what's really cool about this program is not only are the animals being rehabilitated, but the inmates are as well. One of the prison governors describes it as a softening and humanizing experience for his inmates. Until I see you guys again, I hope you all have an excellent start to your spring or your fall if you're from down under. Sorry. Be careful operating anything that could be used as a weapon. Because really, and stay safe out there. Bye.